Raymond Holt had not eaten in 2 days. Not skipped a meal. Not eaten light. Not made do with crackers and coffee. 2 full days of nothing, no bread, no soup, no kindness from a stranger with a spare sandwich. Just water from a gas station bathroom sink and the slow, grinding ache of a stomach that had long since stopped asking and started simply hurting. He sat on the corner of Mercer and Fifth with his back against a cold brick wall, watching the city move around him the way a river moves around a stone, without noticing, without slowing, without care. People walked past in good coats and warm scarves, carrying paper cups of coffee that steamed in the November air. He watched those cups the way a drowning man watches a lifeboat drifting just out of reach. Raymond was 51 years old. He had not always been here. There was a time, not so long ago that he had forgotten it, but long enough that it felt like someone else's life, when he had a small apartment on Linden Street with a working heater and a kitchen table and a cat named Chester who slept on the radiator every night. He had worked 12 years as a warehouse foreman for a logistics company on the east side of the city. Reliable. Steady. The kind of man his supervisor called when something needed doing right. Then the company downsized. Then the savings ran out. Then the apartment went. Then Chester went to a neighbor who could actually feed him. And then Raymond went, out into the street, one step at a time, the way a man sinks into water, slowly and then all at once. That had been 19 months ago. He had learned things in those 19 months that no comfortable life ever teaches. He had learned which shelters filled up by 4 in the afternoon and which ones stayed open past midnight. He had learned that the warmest spots in the city were the library on Grant Avenue and the hospital waiting room on Clement Street, as long as you looked like you were waiting for someone. He had learned that people rarely made eye contact with a homeless man, not out of cruelty, mostly, but out of a discomfort they didn't know how to carry. He had also learned that hunger had its own personality. In the beginning it was loud and demanding, like a child throwing a fit. After a while it went quiet. It just settled into you, low and constant, like a radio playing in another room that you could never quite turn off. Today it was very quiet. He had $5 in his jacket pocket. He had been protecting that $5 bill since Tuesday, 3 days now, folding it carefully, checking on it the way another man might check on a wallet full of hundreds. It was going to be soup. The diner on Porter Street sold a large bowl of chicken soup with a bread roll for $4.75. He had been thinking about that soup with a focus and dedication that surprised even him. It had become something almost sacred, the goal that was getting him through each hour. He was going to get up and walk to Porter Street in 20 minutes. That was the plan. And then he heard the sound. It was small at first, easy to miss under the noise of traffic and wind. But Raymond had spent 19 months developing a sensitivity to sounds that most people tuned out, and this one reached him clearly through everything else. It was a woman crying. Not dramatically. Not loudly. The quiet, exhausted kind of crying that a person does when they have been holding themselves together for too long and finally something small breaks them completely open. He turned his head. She was standing outside the glass door of the gas station convenience store 20 feet away. Young, maybe 26, 27. Dark hair pulled back. A puffy blue jacket that had seen better winters. In her arms she held a little boy, maybe 3 years old, his face flushed red and warm-looking, his small head resting heavy on her shoulder the way a sick child's head always does, that particular boneless, trusting weight that breaks a parent's heart. She was staring at her phone. Then at her wallet. Then at the store door. Then back at her phone. Raymond watched her for a moment without moving. She went into the store. She came back out 30 seconds later without a bag, without anything, and the crying had gotten slightly worse, still quiet, still controlled, but her chin was trembling now and she was blinking fast and bouncing the little boy gently on her hip the way mothers do when they are trying to comfort a child while they themselves are falling apart. Raymond understood immediately. He had seen that specific combination of empty hands and desperate eyes enough times now to read it like a language. She needed something for the child. Medicine, most likely. Maybe formula. Maybe both. And she didn't have enough money to get it. He stayed very still for a long moment. The soup was right there in his mind. Hot. Real. 20 minutes away. He thought about Tuesday. About the 3 days he had carefully kept that bill safe. He thought about the hollow, quiet ache in his stomach and the holes in the bottom of his left shoe and the fact that November was only getting colder and he had no idea where he was sleeping tonight. He thought about all of that. And then something moved in his chest, something that poverty and cold and 19 months of being invisible had not managed to reach. It wasn't a thought exactly. It wasn't a decision that he reasoned through step by step. It was older than that. Deeper. The part of Raymond Holt that had survived everything, the job loss, the apartment, the loneliness, the invisibility, and had kept its shape through all of it. He stood up. His knees were stiff from the cold concrete and his back ached in that specific way it always did now in November, but he stood up straight and walked the 20 feet to where she was standing. She saw him coming and something flickered in her eyes, a reflex, quickly caught, quickly swallowed. He had seen that reflex before too. He didn't take it personally anymore. He stopped in front of her. He reached into his jacket pocket. He took out the $5 bill, slightly worn at the fold, but intact, and he held it out to her without a word. She stared at it. Then at him. "Please," he said quietly. "For the little one." She didn't move for a moment. Then her face did something complicated and human and impossible to fully describe, a kind of breaking and opening at the same time, and she took the bill from his hand. Her fingers were cold. The little boy on her shoulder turned his flushed face slightly and looked at Raymond with the enormous, uncomplicated eyes that only very young children have. "I can't," she started. "You can," Raymond said simply. And then, because he meant it completely, "I hope he feels better soon." He turned and walked away before she could say anything else. He did not look back. He walked slowly, hands in his empty pockets, back toward the corner of Mercer and Fifth. The wind had picked up and it moved through his coat in places the fabric had thinned. His stomach made a sound that he acknowledged and then quietly set aside. He found his spot against the brick wall and sat back down. The strange thing, the thing that would stay with him later when he thought about this day, was how he felt. He had expected to feel the loss of it. The soup. The bread roll. The 475 worth of warmth and calories that he had been building toward for 3 days. He had expected that absence to be sharp and painful in the way hunger always was. Instead he felt something that took him a few minutes to identify, because it had been so long. He felt like himself. Not the man the street had made him. Not the invisible figure that people moved around without seeing. Not the sum of everything he had lost over 19 months. He felt like Raymond Holt, the man who had worked 12 honest years, who had kept a cat named Chester, who had sat at a kitchen table and eaten meals he had cooked himself. The man he actually was, underneath everything that had happened to him. He leaned his head back against the cold brick and looked up at the November sky, which was the particular gray of old pewter, heavy with the promise of rain. He was still hungry. He was still cold. He had no plan for dinner and no certainty about tonight's shelter and no idea what tomorrow looked like. But something had been kept alive today that mattered more than soup. He closed his eyes. He didn't know, couldn't possibly know, that 20 blocks away, a woman was calling her husband with shaking hands, describing a man on a corner with holes in his shoes and $5 to his name who had looked at her son and said, "I hope he feels better soon." He didn't know what that phone call was already setting in motion. He just sat against the wall in the November cold, breathing slowly, feeling, against all reasonable odds, like a man who still had something worth being. The night was coming. But so was the morning. The tap came at 6:47 in the morning. Raymond knew the time because there was a digital clock in the pharmacy window directly across the street, and it was the first thing he saw when his eyes opened, red numbers glowing through the gray early light like a small, indifferent announcement. 6:47, the city was just beginning to wake. Garbage trucks groaned somewhere in the distance. A pigeon walked a slow circle 3 feet from his left shoe, deeply unbothered by everything. Then the tap came again. Gentle. Deliberate. On his shoulder. Raymond had been on the street long enough to know that a gentle tap was almost always safer than a loud voice. A loud voice at this hour usually meant move along. But this was patient. Almost respectful. He turned his head slowly, the way a man does when he is not entirely sure what he is about to find. The man crouching beside him was somewhere in his mid-40s. Dark coat, good quality, the kind that sits properly on the shoulders. Dark hair with gray at the temples. He was crouching all the way down to Raymond's level, which almost no one ever did. Most people who addressed Raymond at all did it from a standing position, looking down. This man had come down to the ground, and that single detail registered somewhere deep and quiet in Raymond's chest before a single word was spoken. He had calm eyes. The kind of eyes that had seen difficulty and come through it without bitterness. "Raymond," the man said. That stopped everything. Raymond had not heard his own name spoken by a stranger in longer than he could accurately remember. His name. Not hey or sir or the dozen other impersonal sounds people used when they had to acknowledge him. His actual name, said carefully, like it mattered. "How do you know my name?" Raymond asked. His voice was rough from sleep and cold. The man smiled, not a large smile, but a real one. "My wife described you very well," he said. "She also asked the woman at the gas station if she knew who you were. Apparently you sit at that corner most mornings." He paused. "My name is David. David Chen. The woman with the little boy last night, that was my wife, Sarah. And my son, Marcus." Raymond was quiet for a moment, processing. "How is the boy?" he asked. Because that was the thing he actually wanted to know. David Chen looked at him for a second with an expression that was difficult to read, something between surprise and recognition. "He's better," he said. "Fever broke around midnight. He's home sleeping." He paused again. "You gave her your last money." "She told me. She said she could tell." Raymond said nothing. He looked back at the pharmacy clock. 6:48. "I didn't do it for anything," Raymond said quietly. Not defensively. Just as a fact that he wanted to be clear. "I know," David said. "That's exactly why I'm here." He reached beside him, Raymond hadn't noticed the bag, and brought forward a large paper bag that released a smell so immediate and so devastatingly good that Raymond's entire body responded before his mind caught up. Hot food. Real food. The kind of smell that doesn't come from a gas station or a shelter cart. It came from a kitchen where someone who knew what they were doing had been cooking since early morning. David set the bag in Raymond's lap and then sat down, fully sat down, right there on the concrete beside him, and said simply, "Eat first. Then we'll talk." Raymond opened the bag with hands that were not entirely steady. Inside was a container of chicken soup, real soup, thick and golden, with vegetables and noodles and a layer of fat on the surface that told you it had been made from an actual bird. Beside it was a bread roll, still warm. Below that, wrapped in foil, were scrambled eggs with herbs and what turned out to be smoked salmon folded through them. There was a coffee, large, with a lid, and a small container of orange juice. Raymond ate slowly. Not because he was trying to be dignified, but because after 2 days his body needed slowness to accept it properly. David Chen sat beside him on the concrete in his good coat and said nothing, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of a man who understood that some moments did not need to be filled with words. When Raymond finished, he wrapped his hands around the coffee and looked straight ahead for a moment. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "My wife cried for 2 hours last night," David said. Not because she was sad. Because she said a man with nothing chose to give everything he had to a child he didn't know, and then walked away without asking for anything. "She said she wanted me to find you. She made me promise." He paused. "I would have come anyway." Raymond turned and looked at him. "I run a restaurant," David said. "Chen's Kitchen on Alderman Street. 12 years. Started with 8 tables and my mother's recipes. We have 43 tables now and a kitchen that runs 6 days a week." He said it without boastfulness, just the way a man states a thing that is true. "I need a dishwasher. Full-time. Monday through Saturday. The pay is $14 an hour to start. There's a staff meal every shift, breakfast or dinner depending on the hours. The team is good. Nobody gives anybody a hard time." Raymond stared at him. "I know what you're thinking," David said. "And the answer is no, this is not charity. I need someone reliable. Someone who shows up. The last 2 men I hired lasted 3 weeks between them." He looked at Raymond directly. "A man who protects $5 for 3 days and then gives it away rather than break his word to himself, that is not a man who doesn't show up." Something moved through Raymond that he didn't immediately have a name for. It was warm and it was sharp at the same time, the way feeling returns to a hand that has been numb from cold, not entirely comfortable but undeniably alive. "There's something else," David said. He reached into his coat pocket and set a key card on top of the now empty food bag in Raymond's lap. "The hotel on Sutter Street, the Bridgeway. My brother-in-law manages it. There's a room for you for the next 30 days, already paid. Ground floor. Clean bathroom. Heat that works." He said it simply, without theater. "You'll need an address for paperwork. You'll need a place to sleep that isn't concrete. After 30 days, with 2 paychecks in your pocket, the rest is yours to figure out. But you won't be figuring it out from nothing." Raymond looked down at the key card. He looked at it for a long time. In 19 months on the street he had received a great deal. He had received pity, occasionally. He had received directions to shelters he already knew about. He had received lectures, twice, from people who wanted to explain to him how his situation was the result of choices. He had received, on 3 occasions, genuine and uncomplicated kindness from strangers who had given him food or money or a warm pair of gloves with no conversation attached. But no one had ever sat down beside him on the concrete and spoken to him like a man being offered something he had earned. That was the difference. And Raymond felt it in a place that Northwest amount of street living had been able to reach. He picked up the key card. He turned it over once in his fingers. "I haven't worked in 19 months, he said. Not as an excuse. As a fact David deserved to have. "I know," David said. "The first week, you'll shadow my kitchen manager, Luis. He's been with me 9 years. He'll show you everything. The pace is fast but it's learnable." He stood up from the concrete, brushing off his coat without self-consciousness. Then he extended his hand downward, not the way someone extends a hand to help a person up, but the way someone extends a hand to close a deal between equals. Raymond looked at it. Then he reached up and took it, and David Chen pulled him to his feet with a grip that was firm and without hesitation. They stood at the same height, eye to eye, in the early morning light on Mercer Street while the city finished waking up around them. "Monday morning," David said. 7 a.m. Come around to the back entrance on Alderman. Ask for Luis. Tell him David sent you." He paused. "Though I suspect he'll already know." He gave Raymond a single nod, the kind that means this is settled, this is real, and then turned and walked back toward a car parked half a block up the street. Raymond stood on the corner watching him go. In his left hand was a hotel key card. In his right hand was a coffee cup, still warm. The pharmacy clock across the street read 7:04. The pigeon was gone. The garbage trucks had moved on to the next block. Somewhere above the gray November clouds, the sun was doing what it always did, rising, indifferent to whether anyone below was ready for it or not. Raymond Holt was ready. He took a long, slow breath of cold morning air and held it for a moment, really held it, the way a man does when he is trying to make sure something is real and not a dream his hungry mind invented in the night. It was real. He exhaled. He picked up his single bag from the doorway, the one that held everything he owned, and he slung it over his shoulder and started walking. Not toward the shelter. Not toward the library on Grant Avenue or the hospital waiting room on Clement Street. Toward Sutter Street. Toward the first morning of everything that came next.